Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú
The Ashen Forge. The Ashen Forge.
Hello and welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin. How are y'all doing?
Right?
Doing all right.
Another Sunday evening. Not a lot of new stuff, but plenty to talk about. So, Neuro, I know you had a lot of ideas. I think a good discussion on permanence, which is something I don't know that we've talked specifically about.
Yeah, it is definitely something that has come up as a subject a lot of different times, but I don't think we've really focused specifically on it. And to be honest, it's one of those things that every time it's come up in a live stream talking about going to an area and farming to kill enemies to get loot, that always kind of raises a bit of a red flag for me, because to me, that's something that breaks from what I considered the intent of the game to be, from my understanding of things up to this point, is that, you know, the idea that things will constantly be changing, constantly in flux, that things people will do will, you know, change the environment, change the world in such a way that everything isn't there all the time. You can't just go to Carfin and kill specific mobs to get the Carfin weapons and armor and stuff. But it's something that you know, I feel like if you're trying to make something where content is dynamic and things are always different, but you also end up having like very theme parky sort of, well, you know, you can always go here on every server and get this similar experience regardless of the events going on in the world and what has happened there previously. That seems to be like a bit of an incongruity in terms of, you know, trying to make a game where what players do matters and things get changed, versus something that is, you know, fairly static and more akin to the usual theme park. There might be a few little events and triggers that affect the entire server as a whole, but it's mostly like the next DLC is the thing that's really advancing the world.
So what kind of game is Ashes? Theme park or sandbox?
It wants to be
There's
something.
a name for it. What's the name for it?
I mean, there is the meow, of course.
What's the Ashes name for the type of game it is?
A
It's
sand park, a theme box.
It's a theme box. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is it's an odd designation, and I'm sure there's a lot of games you could say that fill that sort of description, like Star Wars Galaxies, for example. I would say,
I didn't play it, so I'm not sure.
I would say, you know, once you leave the towns, everything outside a certain, like, you can't build here sort of distance is open land. You can build there. You can do stuff. You can set up shop. So I feel like it had a lot of that sort of theme boxy sort of thing, where there's a lot of stuff that's driven by what the players are doing, but there's definitely a lot of like very traditional theme parky, you know, go here to this quest hub, take this quest, do this thing. These are the steps you need to do to you know, build your way towards, you know, whatever class that you're trying to rank up in, or how you earn the money to try to build the sort of settlement or whatever that you're trying to build. But that, of course, is a bit of a different expression than the way that Ashes is doing it.
Or say that they're doing it. So I don't think that we've seen it yet. So it's kind of difficult to weigh in. We don't know if they're going to be able to accomplish it. But they want to have a lot of player-driven content. But Steven's philosophy is that you need some dev-curated content to help create a cohesive storyline. The thing is, so I'm hoping that you won't just be going to the same spot to get specific drops in terms of finished gear, finished armor, or finished weapons. That what will be dropping is area related or theme related resources, and then you craft what you want. So you might go to a place that doesn't have the exact same mobs. It especially might not have the exact same NPCs. So they won't be dropping the exact same stuff, but they'll be dropping similarly themed things resources that you can go then back and craft into stuff that you want. So I would hope that you might have resources related to the schools, the archetype schools that you're looking for, and then you're crafting archetype school related gear and accessories that you're getting from, if you've got some form of dragon, then you're going to get a fire eye or a fire scale or an ice scale. So you're not exactly having the exact same experience, but you might be getting similarly themed resources that you can then use to craft what you want. That's what I'm hoping for. But dungeons are supposed to change. How does it session by session? So even when you go back, if you decide to retreat and go back to the same dungeon, or especially if you wipe and you go back to the same dungeon, it should not have exactly the same configuration of NPCs as when you went before. So you might have the same boss, but the minions won't be exactly the same. That's what they're shooting for. How well they're going to be able to accomplish that, we don't know. It's been, 5 years already? And we haven't seen any of that stuff. We haven't seen much node stuff either, have we, Phantom?
What's a node?
Mhm.
I like your idea. So when it comes to drops, yeah, I think the idea of resources that are found in a specific region or with a specific group makes sense. From the crafting side, though, I would also like to see. I very much liked. I follow this line of, if it's a, I don't know, if it's a wolf, it should drop wolf related stuff, teeth, fur. If it's a humanoid that is coming at me with a club, then it should drop a club. What I would think would be nice to see change is, so I'm not opposed to the idea of NPCs dropping items. I think they could drop items and resources. But the items they drop, I mean, we just had a massive fight. So why would it be, 100% durability and not, not somehow scuffed up? Or why would a lowly roaming guard in some hallway have the same type of weapon, as somebody in an ad in a boss chamber or something. So I think also you would have varying degrees of quality based off where you're at. The idea, I think, though, not necessarily, because when you would get sort of a club or something like that, or even a boss item, the boss just had a big fight with you too. Now maybe they have some special crown that becomes lootable, but it has to be repaired, either repaired or destroyed, and then you can learn how to craft it over time. So maybe having that option of, okay, this is our first kill. We have our blacksmith here. We have the hammer, but at this point, it makes more sense probably just to deconstruct it to learn how to craft it or repair it. And then when we come back, next time, if it drops the same thing, well, we know how to, we've seen this before. We know how to fix it. And so it still drops damaged, but maybe on your way there, you got resources from some of the other things in the dungeon that then allow you to repair it later. I don't know, something along those lines.
I do like that idea that the big item that drops from the boss, that you kill it and then it's dead and gone. instead of, it might be replenished by a different enemy, but that enemy in that crown or whatever, that's what you've got. And yeah, maybe it is deconstruct and learn how to make it, or potentially going through some series of quests to try to restore and upgrade it in some way that, some other method. Yeah, that's definitely the sort of stuff that, and with that, what you were kind of saying there does also make me think of the, from the narrative side, why everything wouldn't be available on a body of something that you just killed. It seems like if they wanted to do something where some part of, maybe not for humanoids, but like corrupted beings or something like that, part of their essence and being is only active when they're, with their equipment, is only active when they're alive, and when they die, it's like, great, it's just a half rotted chunk of wood that just a moment ago was infused with a bunch of evil magic and was clubbing us, but now it's not, and you can't put that magic back in because the thing's dead. So it's just skipped over. It's not even great loot. It's just trash. There need to be some sort of explanation for that. Or likewise, for NPCs that are more like humanoid but die and respawn, why are they respawning? What do they get to keep from death that they bring back the next time? Is it something where every enemy would start with a full kit of everything and you're slowly chipping them away and they're losing more and more of their gear and the bits and the pieces and stuff until they're replaced or changed form in some other way? You were going to say something in the middle there.
We'll have to figure out how respawns are working for NPCs as well as player characters, and if it's the same mechanism. But I mean, I would hope
Alpha
that
1 lore, I was going to say real quick, Alpha 1 lore, the characters who went in the cave, the one was dead on the ground, never going to respawn, and the other one was mostly dead, but you were going to be able to help him out. That's kind of funny. It's like, okay, well, players, they respawn, enemies seem to respawn, but there are mundane people that can go out and die and don't get to respawn.
Yeah, I would expect NPCs to be able, some NPCs to be able to respawn, by whatever mechanism the players are using. But we won't just be fighting mundane wolves, so I would expect that. We see all kinds of. I don't even know the names of all the different types of region specific animals that we've been seeing, but there's seasonal animals as well, or seasonal attributes to the animals we're fighting. So I would think that some of the resources that drop from those types of animals will be seasonal or regional, and we'll still be using attributes from them in our weapons and armor, so it won't all be mundane heath and mundane fur that's dropping. But what was the other thing about that? So all of that stuff drops.
I'll say one more.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well,
no, you go ahead.
One more thing about the drops that I think could get past this idea of, having the same loot every single time is perhaps how you kill something could matter just as much as if you did. So if you are going in to fight a witch or a warlock and you have somebody that wears light cloth that wants their robe, okay, maybe if you used, I don't know, throwing arbitrary numbers, maybe 50% of whatever it was that killed it was fire damage, and no longer can you loot the robe because it caught on fire. Something like that. I think that would be another way to, one, change up the loot that you can get with purpose, but two, it also forces groups to think differently, not always use the same exact way of killing something, unless they all happen to be, I don't know, armor wearers and metal, the fire didn't matter because they all wear metal anyways, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that you were saying that sparked my interest is that I hope that um, more of the motivation in this game, I think in RPGs, MMORPGs in general, I wish that more often we would see the motivation be that we're dealing with these mobs and NPCs because we want to end a threat, not because we want super great loot. So as you were saying, even when we're just getting mundane loot, um, I want to get something maybe. But the real reason, the primary reason for me to fight these mobs and NPCs should be because they're a threat, and I really just need to end the threat. That being said, it would also be nice if we didn't always have to kill them. Maybe at some point we negotiate. And I see that in World of Warcraft sometimes when we're doing practice fights, we go and we just test these guards' mettle, and so we fight them down to, um, I don't know, 5% of their health, and then they say, okay, I give, you win. We're gonna, you're great. We're gonna go do something else, and you get some XP from that. But there should be some uh, criminals and villains that do the same thing. Hey, you don't have to kill me. I promise to be good after this, and maybe they change their mind later and you kill them the second time. I don't know, but um, it would be nice if we didn't always have to kill stuff.
Yeah. And you definitely do bring up one of the things that's a really big point is how much of people playing the game is going to be chase loot, chase builds, chase blueprints, chase the material side, versus how much is players trying to advance narratives and fix the problems and try to be on the right side of conflicts that will have long-term and long-lasting results in the game.
Well, we have various forms of progression, so hopefully some of our motivation will be social organization progress. Some of it will be religion progress. There should be some conflict among the religions. I would also hope that there's some cooperation among certain religions. Uh, the seven are all part of the same pantheon, so I hope they're getting along fairly well. But in terms of what regions we're putting temples in, I would think I might be knocking down somebody's temple in order to advance my own, and get the benefits thereof. So there might be some conflict there. Um, but we've got what social org. We've got some racial stuff, although I'm not sure how important the racial progression is going to be if crafting is we don't have racial abilities that we're trying to progress like I don't know what the racial stats are going to be. If it's going to be more background instead of racial, then I don't know that it's going to matter what the racial population of a node is, has the most. Why do I care if it's a vec node versus a Nakua node if it's not going to improve my Nakua progression? I don't know.
Well, didn't he say they haven't really thought much or gotten too far into the idea of racial differences at all? I
Well,
think is what he.
originally the idea was that you should be pushing uh, to get a race to get a Nakua Metro versus a Vec Metro because that's going to help you advance your Nakua progression to the end.
Yeah.
But more recently, he says they're thinking about changing that to not having racial stats be that important and instead have background be more important. And I'm saying if that's the case, then I don't know why you care if you have a Nakua Metro because it seems like it's not going to matter about your racial progression. But
Yeah, then it's just going to come down to appearance.
Yeah. So I hope he talks more about that in the next couple of months, how that affects the racial progression or the racial population of a metro, the primary racial population of a metro. But, when was the last time they talked about node advancement?
Yeah, that's a good question. It brings up something else that I've been thinking about is like what what happens for a node and the surrounding sort of region if it doesn't really go up or down? It just stays, let's say it's a peninsula that got to tier 4 and then just never stopped being tier 4 for one real world year. What's that going to look like? Obviously, there's going to be the temporal seasonal changes. Those are going to happen. Those will occur. There's going to be likely some amount of progress going on with building up to a point. I don't know if there's going to be like a limit by which a tier 4 can advance and expand and build, and then it's like, well, we can't really build up any further if we would, the next building would require us to be tier 5, so we're stuck with where we're at. And it's perhaps already gotten to that point maybe by the beginning of this hypothetical 1 year. What else is going to change in the region? You kill one type of creature, a different type of creature might take over. Okay, that's not really much change. I mean, it is and it isn't.
Nodes are also affected by other nodes, the advancement and deterioration of other nodes across the map. So it won't necessarily just stay exactly the same. But if you really want some progression, then that's why you go support other nodes, and maybe you have to help destroy other nodes in order to be able to advance yours, or maybe you want to send some money over to some other nodes so that they'll destroy yours, and something else will happen. Maybe a different node will take over as stage 4 or 5 or whatever. So
I mean,
that's
I'll have to
supposed to be
build back
pushing our
up, but
conflict.
And it's a good question, because also just from a top level too. I mean, we've talked about the idea of Metropolis. Players tend to like to feel comfortable if something's working very well. Why disrupt it? Now I get it. The theory as well. You'll have some social disagreements, and somebody will piss somebody off, and so a guild will declare a war on a guild, and blah blah blah. But I think people tend to like the path of least resistance, even in video games. So yeah. So what happens if you do sort of just have no change? People are very happy with the way it's going. Can you
That's
introduce change?
why that's why racial progression was kind of important, because if I'm a Nakua, there's 9 races, there's 9 player races, and there's only 5 metropolises. So if I'm a Nakua and I need to have a Nakua metro in order to get to the end of my racial progression, and there's no Nakua metro, then I'm going to want to have to destroy one of those metros and try and get a Nakua metro built on that server. That's supposed to be part of the motivation for conflict, for player conflict. But again, if racial progression doesn't really matter because your stats aren't affecting anything, then that seems like less of an incentive to destroy a metro. So again, based on that, I wish Stephen would talk about how that's going to affect node progression. Maybe Stephen should just talk about node progression again.
I also wonder how much the impermanence and strife and struggling between nodes will impact other systems. For example, I have a feeling that a full-on like throat slitting it everywhere and anywhere sort of PvP server is just going to go down in flames in corruption in record time. That like almost all of them, I would imagine, are going to be the ones that collapse second. The first ones are the low population servers that'll collapse, and then the second ones are going to be the PvP heavy servers where they never got a hold of the corruption and it just built up and built up, and so those ones will start to collapse in on each other. And the ones that are going to have the best longevity are the ones that people have the least amount of strife and the least amount of like things having to change hands and having open combat and ganking and that sort of stuff to try to move your machinations, but instead it's more like a almost like a planned economy sort of thing. It's like, all right, well, we've gotten everything we can out of this metropolis here, so we're going to work things out. This one's going to attack this one, this one's going to attack this one, and we've got this whole like pattern laid out, what's getting knocked down, the timings and everything, so everybody can move all their tools and everything out well in advance of the places we're going to knock down, so that way there's the least amount of sort of resource loss and friction that goes on. Like I would imagine that's the sort of thing that would lead to a server where the corruption is something that they would potentially be addressing a lot more, and not fighting amongst each other as much, being able to kind of hang on a lot longer. I could be mistaken with that, but it makes me wonder if the ones that have more everybody trying to kick each other over, whether or not they focus on taking down the corruption that might accrue elsewhere in the world as a result, if those are the ones that are just going to have a harder time keeping their corruption tamped down, or if node knocking other nodes down really has no bearing whatsoever on the whole corruption system and how much it's building up and making all the nasty areas in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Never considered the idea of some servers being more PvP servers and others being less. I've not. I mean, it would make sense, I guess, but
every big namer PvP or every big namer stream server, anybody who's like anybody big coming over from whatever other game that's building up, or they have their community, they don't need to build it, they just want to play something fun. Those folks are probably going to be the ones that have the most PvP, because honestly, fanboys on Twitch can be real rabid and can be real aggressive. So I get the feeling those are the ones that are going to be like the giant, like roving gank fests, versus the ones that don't have giant streaming populations are going to be the ones that at least have a chance to be more like civil, I guess.
Well, and I wonder.
Yeah, Teradin is saying in chat that we saw it early on with New World in terms of RP or heavy PvP, and the players sorted out themselves. And again, that's what Stephen and Jeffrey Bard were expecting that to be the case for their servers. Some are likely to be more PvP versus RP or PvE or even crafting oriented. So you'll get to know, hey, this is the unofficial RP server, this is the unofficial PvE server, and people will strive for that. And I assume some people will join those servers just to try and throw a wrench in there and piss people off. But
I'm highly.
It's a lot harder to do if you're one person with a wrench versus thousands of organized players versus everybody's throwing wrenches at each other.
I'm highly curious to see what the head start servers end up being like versus the others. There was a post at some point talking about is having early access pay to win or something like that. But then it was pointed out that no, those will be different servers that will be very clearly labeled as head start servers, so you would not be forced to join them. I'm just very curious to see what those are like, because I think those are just limited to Kickstarter packages that had it, I believe, because and maybe it was the very first summer sale that they did that kind of coincided with Kickstarter, because I do not believe any of the current packages that they sell have any sort of head start associated with them. So I'm
I
just
don't think they're gonna look particularly different because nodes aren't turned on, so you can't progress your node until the head start is over. So mostly what will be happening during head start is people who've played alpha and beta will be trying to head towards the nodes where they want to populate.
Mhm.
Um, but I think after a few months, it's not gonna the head start server isn't really gonna look different. It's just, people will have the alpha players, the beta players, or the Kickstarter players basically will have a better chance of trying to get a node, a scientific node if they want that, or to get their dwarf node in a mountain or something like that. They'll just have a better chance of picking a location on the map that they want.
No, I mean, you're right, but 48 hours is 48 hours. Yeah, that's a fair amount of time. And if they're labeled, I'm just curious how many people avoid those and then just what that server looks like. Because I get the strong sense that when you look at the overall population and you look at when people join the forums and things like that, that the early group, the sort of Kickstarter relative people, sure, they included PvP players, but I feel like it was much more of a balance, and a lot of the PvP crowd came after. So you're right; it could very well be, nobody cares one way or the other. But I'm just really curious if they're labeled, if that ends up changing how they look. So, a question about PAX Day.
Yeah, and I was gonna say so. Magisto says that joined late, but the hosts go over their thoughts on PAX Day, and I think Diggs will love it. We have not gone over PAX Day because we're actually planning to have a separate
Try to.
show for PAX Day.
Actually, you know what? It turns out I I have some advanced stuff that was sent to me. I don't know if Maggie approved this, but I actually know what the servers are going to be looking like for most people. The early start servers. All right, let me bring up an image.
Uh-oh.
Is it going to show? No, it's not. I wrote down on a piece of paper. Your place in the server queue is 124,779. You're not gonna. That's what most people are gonna see in the first 48 hours, honestly.
Well, again, it's interesting because what's the server load supposed to be? How many players have they said per server, per world? Is it 5,000?
I don't even think they know yet.
8
to 10K concurrent.
Because
we'll see.
I would have to pull this thread back up because the Kickstarter numbers were below that. I think anyways, it will be just very interesting to see how that all shakes out. So.
Or if not a queue, the other thing they might be seeing is other server-related downtimes. Just because we just finished the last beta and everything on all of the servers is almost exactly the same, plus or minus a few things being, revealed and set up. That doesn't mean that the first 48 hours may or may not have, various technical hiccups and hurdles of their own. There's a lot that can happen in those first 48 hours.
Well, yeah. So what about us with permanence? Anything still to touch on?
Yeah. We had kind of talked about this earlier, the idea of whether you should be trying to get gear, whether you should be getting things to help you reproduce stuff. It really does feel like a lot of what would make farming an area and basically farming out the enemies to the point where they're empty husks, that they're still powerful and they're still dangerous, but you can't really get much drops off of them anymore. I kind of like seeing something like that. So it is, okay, we have killed those creatures to death. They're going to keep coming back because they're ghosts, but we've knocked them all out enough times that there's nothing they're dropping. And in the process, we've learned all the items that they, how to make them, all the stuff they wear, all the stuff that they're armed with. We've learned how to make all the special materials and metals and alloys and fabrics and whatever that are used to make their signature types of items, so you can make it not only look the same but have similar sort of attributes and properties. You're going to get their tools and how to actually, the things that you're going to set up on the freeholds, your stations that are going to process things in a very special way. Maybe it's a higher efficiency. Maybe it's the only way you can make a certain sort of material is that you need a certain type of table or a certain augment to the table that you have to have gotten from that area. That's the sort of thing that I'm kind of hoping to see a lot more of. Is you do the thing in the area, and then it'll get somewhat depleted. Things will change. Maybe a tier advancement or depletion. Maybe some other major event goes on. A few season changes and nobody's gone back there. Maybe the enemies have changed a bit. Maybe they're now armed a bit differently from ghosts, essentially representing a different time and era and season that existed there. And so there's a reason to kind of go back, and you're not getting exactly the same thing, but you're getting like the second age of Carfin equipment instead of the first time you were there. They had the first age of Carfin stuff. So that's the sort of stuff that I think would be nice to see. But the idea that it's just a place where it's like Mount Everest or whatever. People go there by bus. They wait in line. They all go and hit the dude at the front that gives the item, and they all kill the item, or the Sherpas kill the item, the boss or whatever. You get the item, and it's just this very like straightforward, ho-hum, curated sort of thing. That doesn't feel at all like the nature of what this game wants to be or is supposed to be. And so I do like that there should be things that make people not necessarily want to try to farm an area after a while, not because the drops are bad, but just because you're not getting them anymore because they've been farmed out. You got to find someone who can make them if you want them.
Yeah, I would love to see what other detriments over farming or depleting an area leads to. Um, what else moves in or moves out. Um, um,
What
does
if the
become a
armor that
wasteland?
you knocked off of them is replaced with corruption, and now you've got much more dangerous ghosts that are, blighting the area?
Yeah.
You didn't
What
solve
does
your
it
ghost
unlock?
problem, you just
Yeah.
made it worse.
Yeah.
And
Um,
I think even before you get to that question, we, of course, as the nodes grow and change, they've said that, mobs will change, dungeon will change, the layout will change. But do they have something in place where you are at a metropolis and you have your connected, 5, 4, 3, so you have your 4 nodes, 3 nodes, things that aren't going to change very much at all. Do they have other ways of changing dungeons? Is it only going to be tied to the growth or destruction of a node, or do they have other mechanisms in place where if your node right below metropolis level is persistent for 6 months at its current state or stage, like do they have other ways to implement changes within dungeons, closing, opening?
what kind of change do you mean? Because again, the dungeons are supposed to change and raids session to session, so there'll be some changes regardless. That's
Well, I
regardless
mean,
of
whole big
stage.
changes, right? So if, you might have a completely new boss mob, right? Node 2 to 3. You might have a completely new dungeon open up. So my question is related to what Neuro was just saying: is if you have a persistent node that really hasn't changed for several real months, is there do they have other mechanisms in place to kind of cause change independent of a node change, just to keep things
Again,
fresh and different?
I would hope that would be more dependent on narrative and the fact that people have defeated that mob rather than just stage progression.
Yes, another question: if only we knew someone who wrote lore, to ask them whether or not the mobs that we're fighting also have some backstory to them. Maybe not detailed as some NPCs, but do I don't know, the goblins that are in the mountain over there, is there a general a narrative that that specific group follows that will change over time irregardless of node change, more within their own structure? It's an interesting question. I've never thought of this. I mean, I'm happy to hear that maybe there will be, but I've never considered the idea, is this pack of goblins that I'm fighting, is there actually some sort of backstory that is changing behind the scenes that I'm not aware of?
That's kind of part of the event system too, so you have to factor that in. But
because if there is, then you can also very easily, I think, take the character generator and their husbandry model, and you probably could change the boss mobs fairly easily in appearance and in story.
Yeah, so I don't know how easy it is, and this is the plan, but how well they're capable of implementing it, we don't know. I mean, the concepts for story bricks were awesome. Have we seen them in any game yet after 10 years? No. I mean, I would have hoped that after 10 years, story bricks would be easier to implement somewhere, somehow, some kind of way, especially with all the stuff that AI is doing these days.
Okay.
But no.
Easy may be one part of it. It might be easy, but the other part of it, you got to have the money and someone who's going to be willing to put their ass on the line because they've seen it fail. They've seen projects bank on that and fail way more than they've seen projects bank on that and succeed. And so that's kind of the curse that the Meow kind of comes into these days. Unless you've got someone like Steven who's able to basically fund the damn thing out of pocket as a passion project, you're not going to see these sorts of systems that we're talking about go in and be advanced and be utilized. It's not that we don't want them. It's not that the people on all of these projects don't want them. But the people who have the say, the people who have the money, the people who think they know best about how all the technology works and don't understand how new things could be synthesized here to make a much better and more different product. It feels like some amount of laziness, some amount of a lack of wanting to take on the risk and the danger, and I guess the other one is maybe they just don't want to have that many content people because, golly, that's always going to be a lot of content.
Typing something.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think, again, I still haven't seen that even with Ashes yet. There's been a lot of talk for the last 5 years, but I haven't seen any of it yet. So we still have yet to see it.
And that is one of the things that, on one hand, I worry, but on the other hand, I get some hope from that. The idea that, no, we don't get to know everything going in. We don't get to see everything. That a lot of it is going to be essentially hidden to us until day one. We might see systems and mechanics and things that are the same template as the thing we'll see in live gameplay. But the actual stories, the narratives, like we might see the celestial dragon god Tetzel worm in closed beta, and by the time they get live, it's like, no, that character's mythical. They didn't exist. What are you talking about? All that stuff that happened in the past is all mythical. It's fiction. You're basically just living in fanfic. Come on, get in the real world here. Join a server and play. It's day one. That's kind of the thing that's a little bit funny is that we'll only get a glimpse. We won't actually get to see the full thing. And I certainly don't think we're going to be in beta for long enough to see like multiple IRL years worth of like content turnover and what it's going to do to a world. So even with everything being like, ship shape and ready, we're only going to have just a taste of, you know, we've had a little bit of strawberry jam, and now it's time to have like, you know, an entire arsenal of berry spreads and preserves that aren't just that one that we were just tasting. So that's the part that I'm kind of hopeful, is that some of the stuff that's being, you know, kept secret and that we're not going to see is partially because it is actually going to be really impactful to do it on, you know, starting from day one, and to do it any sooner would start taking away the sort of the appeal and stuff.
Yeah, I don't think Alpha 2, I mean, much like the battle royale, that doesn't necessarily have to be the story that we experience in Alpha 2, especially, doesn't necessarily have to be the same story that we're experiencing at launch. Um, and you know, Ashes of Creation, it would be kind of interesting to see um, what gets blown up and restarted between beta and launch. Not so much beta and launch, I guess, because it's going to have to be pretty much the same. Um, but maybe
Beta to
between alpha
beta.
and beta.
Yeah, alpha to beta, beta to beta. That's once we're into the last beta, that should hopefully be pretty consistent with the majority of gameplay, at least mechanically.
You know what server will probably be the most interesting to see the lore behind over the long term? The test server, because that is the first persistent server, correct? So, or that's the intent, is for it to be persistent becomes the test server. So just, you know, seeing how things, that would be a very curious one to have a character be a part of. I for the most part will never do test servers. I find them, you know, there's some interest, but then it's kind of like, what's the point? So that, on the other hand, if you can be a part of that world and see the changes that occur over time, would be very interesting.
For some reason, I imagine a test server would constantly get like wiped and reset and just put back to like a randomized advanced state. Like, all right, and we're going to press the reshuffle button. All right, it's as if you walked into a world that's been lived in by players for the past 2 years. Things have been generated, places are all set up. Now run around and do some testing.
Mm-hmm.
Here, we made you level 60s.
And should player characters ever become mythical within the lore? Like if you have someone that is a mayor for 6 months, do they all of a sudden have a spot in the lore? Because we've talked about that with some of the journal related stuff. So, you know, if I was Lord Mayor, can you 6 months later kind of rifle back through the history of the server and read some of the things and see my name sort of enshrined there for the existence of that server?
Okay, so the dumbest thought came in my head. You get to a far enough point in being a mayor or whatever, and now a statue in your likeness can be made. But now with that, if people don't like you, then there's the formal event of going and tearing down your monument, years later when the node's been turned over a couple times, or the moment that the battle starts to knock the place over, that statue just gets blasted. And sure, the person who made it can make another one.
Well, I'm old, so I'm hoping if I die before the game comes out, then that Ombwa will turn me into an NPC and put me on a stufferton and ride me around observing what's going on every once in a while. So
Nah, you're dancing too much. You if you stop dancing for like 6 months, then I'd maybe be worried. Until you stop dancing for, some amount of time, you're not dying anytime soon. You're doing fine. You're probably healthier than the other two of us here.
I'm in pretty good shape.
You are.
Well, Is there any more you'd like to talk about? I would like to get in this one form thing. We got a little bit more, probably about 10,
sure,
10
go
minutes.
for it.
Well, so there's, I was reading through the forums, and I guess I missed this part of the last live stream. I assume it was the last live stream. The post was from March 7th, so that's what, 5 days ago. And I didn't catch this, and I'm curious everyone's thoughts on this. Previously, when we talked about PvP free areas, it was what, stalls, right, where you sell your items, freeholds, and then I feel like there's a third. Am I missing? Is it apartments? I guess, like if you owned a apartment in a metropolis or something like that. Just general player housing. But the post was making the point that apparently now they have switched this to saying that your house, and it's not the entire footprint of your freehold that is free from PvP. It is actually just the physical house that you would enter. That would be the only area that is now free from PvP. And it looks like from the replies, this is a thing. Like, this isn't somebody misrepresenting this. These are some pretty prominent posters that say yes. I am not pleased by that idea that you're going to take this one sort of last refugee place, right, where your crafters, your people can kind of in peace do their own thing, however small of an area it was, but reduce it even further. So the implication obviously being, if I'm out just farming, doing animal husbandry or something like that, somebody could just come onto my freehold, kill me, and essentially take my resources.
But they can't really, because you have permissions for who can be where you
It
are
would have
crafting.
it would have the implication of the permissions appear to be restricted to the house from this, not necessarily the
So
property itself.
yeah, so where would you be other than crafting stuff? What else are you going to be doing on your freehold?
What about for people with farms, fishing farms, animals?
Now that's a good question. What constitutes in a building? Is it like, am I within the footprint of my ranch with the little, what's the fenced in, what's it called? Off the top of my head, you know what it's called, the corral.
The barn?
Is that the barn? Yeah, the open
Corral,
sort of
barn is
fenced area.
building
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah. So you're out in the corral. Is that considered the open, or is this considered part of the footprint of a protected building? That is, I think, going to help us understand things a little better. Now, the other thing I think about, if I want to make sure my freehold is somewhat protected, I would hope I can get a nice tall gate and hire some sentries that are just waiting there for some dude to come there and try to start some stuff to go handle them for me. Because there are people that are on the permissions list, and then there's people that, well, if they show up, they're not, if a fight breaks out, the sentries are going to attack them just the same. That's the sort of thing that I'm hoping, is that it isn't just, all right, here's my house, and then this open area that anybody can walk in and cause trouble. Instead, that you can put down a little bit more protection and reinforcement to the area, so that way someone doesn't simply walk in and start attacking, or can't just start picking off your crafters and your livestock from a distance with a bow.
There's mercenary or minions that you can have that are primarily active during sieges, node sieges.
I think caravans, you can have them too. Like all of the sanctioned combat events, I believe you can have them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, caravan ones seem more temporary, but I would expect the ones that you have at your freehold, would be a little bit more permanent. So those especially I would expect might be around, even to some degree, even not during a siege, possibly.
Right.
But
Well,
I would think that we're going to test this PvP on freeholds, or the possibility of PvP on freeholds during alpha testing, beta testing, and I would think that most of the non-PvPers are gonna want more. They're gonna want their protections to be outside as well as inside. But I also now think of Ashes of Creation as basically a PvP game. So, and we don't have people like Jeffrey to um, uh, whisper in Steven's ear, and Steven is PvP centric. So I wouldn't hold my breath on whether those protections would be outside of buildings on your freehold. But that's what testing is for. So we'll see.
It raises two questions in my head. One, just comes to the community of the game. You know, we've always talked about how do you get PvE players to buy into this game that don't like PvP. You know, really in the initial conversations, it was, well, you know, if you're going to transport goods and sell them, then you have to take some sort of risk or hire someone to take a risk for you. But in, you know, crafting areas that occur outside of a physical house, you know, if all of a sudden those are now open game as well, that I think you're going to severely drive away a very big core of your game that you need to function. And like you say, Diggs, maybe we just have to test it and see how it works. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it doesn't really matter. The way it sounds potentially disastrous. But the other thing I wonder is like, well, okay, well, why did they make this change? You know, why would you do this 5 years later? You know, we've been told always before your freehold was sort of a PvP free area. Now it's not. So I wonder if that just comes down to amount of space. Like, are they worried that there are going to be so many freeholds in certain areas that essentially you just couldn't PvP?
This is one of the, this is one of the things that I've actually been trying to figure out is, and you know, the folks at Intrepid definitely, you know, they say they watch all of the shows. I believe them. They've definitely, you know, done a good job of keeping up on our goofy antics over the years. It's something that I want to get just a diagram. It doesn't even have to be like real world, just an overhead shot of what a region with a node and freeholds and dungeons. It doesn't even have to be anywhere in the actual game world, but just something to give us the idea of what a tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what it's going to look like. How does it spread out? How is it placed? Like, where topographically, where are the freeholds? Are they all clustered in the fields adjacent to the city? Are there like little spots here and there? You might get one that's in the middle of a grove in the woods nearby. Otherwise, you know, you go down the road and there's one that's by a river you can get, but they're in designated locations. That's the stuff that I think would help us really, really understand this a lot better, because I'm having a hard time. They've used so many things and they've shown a lot of cool stuff, but just to actually like a top down, these go here, these can be here, like that's the thing I'm having a hard time visualizing. And that's why understanding why being able to PvP on the freeholds is something that's maybe a little bit hard to fully grok here, because if they are just on a grid outside of town, and you want to make sure that it isn't just Shroud of the Avatar style, everybody's got a freehold, giant hedges that go all the way to the edges, and you can't see anything, you can't access anything, and they're boring and ugly. You know, I don't think they want that whatsoever. But I don't know if, you know, everybody's going to be able to fence up their areas, if there's going to be pathways through, or if there are going to be so like abutted and adjacent to each other that you actually will be able to basically create a wall of freeholds in an area that is essentially impassable because you all built your walls up together. Like that's the sort of stuff I'm having a hard time like really understanding and putting together. Just a top-down diagram of like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tiers to understand. I can pretty well visualize a 1 and a 2, a 3 even. Like we've seen those, we've walked around in them. Show me more. That's the part where I'm kind of lost at, is the stuff beyond the things that we've gotten a chance to walk around in.
Well, we haven't seen freeholds at all, so I think that you won't be able to build walls that are going to prevent people from getting to freeholds. But um, yeah, I don't think it's mechanics change. I think it's just, and I don't know that I'd call it a change. I think we have this kind of different answer because it's Steven giving an answer from a PvP perspective without somebody who's an experienced game designer whispering in his ear saying, yeah, maybe you want to think about the PvE people because they're going to think about it like this.
We don't know who's whispering in his ear right now, honestly. I know we're thinking it's nobody maybe, but
I'm just saying we don't have a lead game designer, so whoever's trying to whisper in his ear does not have significant clout, is what I'm saying. We just really have Steven, and Steven is a PvPer, and so his perspective is going to be biased towards PvP, and he's not going to really understand the PvE player's point of view. That's my point.
I still think the only way this makes sense, and I would love that as well, just to get a sense of how everything's laid out. But the only reason that this would kind of make sense, because as one of the posts mentioned, well, what's really the difference of a couple of feet, right? Of a player running 2 seconds across their lawn to get to their house. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you have a lot of freeholds, maybe not back to back together, but close enough in proximity that by eliminating PvP from freehold complete area, it just gets so disjointed that you can't effectively PvP. And so the answer to that is, okay, well, we'll just make it so it's just the house. That's the only way this makes any sense. So.
And this also brings back another sort of question, and it's one that unfortunately is even expanded and caused even more cause for concern. I say hesitation in getting more aesthetics and things. Is not only do we not know the size of any and all of the freeholds that they're selling, their size, their scalability, any of that. But the more I've dwelled on that over the past couple of weeks, I realized we also don't really know what mount skins can go on what mounts. Like, what is the actual restriction? What are the wearable, the full body skin restrictions? The ones that look like you're in resplendent plate armor. Do you have to be wearing heavy? What portion of heavy armor do you have to be wearing to be allowed to wear this thing representing heavy armor? Otherwise, you have things that visually don't communicate what you're wearing because they're pretty and aesthetic, and now you're throwing off one system to promote another. That's the thing that's like, really, really kind of throwing me off, and it's making me kind of hesitate on getting any more aesthetics. Is I don't know what all the limitations are going to be. I don't know if freeholds. I've already got enough cool freeholds that I don't need another one, but I don't know if I'm even going to have a first one to begin with. And the ones that I do have, I might be able to put all of them on one property. I might only be able to fit one. I don't know. I don't have any idea of the sizes of any of this sort of stuff. So that's one of the things that's been kind of knocking me recently. And then going back to the conversation of freeholds, of course, well, if I can put my giant ugly Eye of Sauron temple down and be an eyesore on the horizon, but that thing takes up an entire freehold, like, do I just need to walk on the very edge of it? And it's like, all right, I'm considered inside. Can I climb up, halfway up the top of it? It's like, all right, I'm considered inside. Or do you have to be like all the way indoors enclosed to be considered inside and safe? I know that was a lot all at once there, folks, but
We'll
But
just
that
have to see.
is, yeah, we'll have to see. That I guess would be another thing that'd be nice with sort of like the top down view of like the tiers and the stuff. Getting it just a relative idea of what the size of these buildings are compared to the sizes of the freeholds available, that would really, really help.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they've got plenty of time. I don't know what the live stream this month is going to be focused on. Hopefully in the next couple of months we'll be able to get a little bit more of a bearing on these sorts of things, because yeah, that definitely is a big deal. Open PvP, until you've entered the threshold of your door, you can be PvP'd out in the open, just like old UO.
Well, hopefully we will get some sort of update on their Unreal Engine upgrade, because I think that is the sort of benchmark at this point as to when they will probably start some testing. So once that's kind of set to go.
I mean, a quarter of the year is over already. It's unlikely that Alpha 2 will be before July.
Well,
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I have no idea where things are at.
yeah, I think that's just where this has been. And I have to agree with Omboy that I fully believe this game will come out. I think it's just a question of with what, as far as what's been promised and talked about and what does it actually release with. I think that is going to be the comparison, not an if or. So anyway,
Will Nodes 3 be before 2024? That's the big question.
that's what I'm saying. It could very well be that Nodes, as it was presented to us in 1 and 2, is not what we get in release. I mean, that certainly, but I don't think that's going to prevent the game from releasing.
Will Nodes be an Alpha 2?
I would hope
Supposed
so.
to be. That's what we're told.
Nodes 3 was supposed to be within a few months.
Sounds like we've got a case of the supposed here, but things are still moving. They're continuing to make progress.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be here sooner. I'd say I really do feel like as soon as they make sure the engine's upgraded and things aren't super weird, they'll start with some of the NDA testing, is my guess. And hopefully they will let us know that that's happening, even if they aren't able to say who, when, where, why, what. I think if
some testing is happening with what are the name? The super high $10,000 players.
The Phoenix Initiative. Are you sure?
Yeah.
I've not seen that mentioned anywhere. I think they should mention it.
They usually have been doing stuff with Phoenix Initiative and not talking about it.
Yeah.
They don't always talk about that stuff with Phoenix Initiative stuff.
All I'm saying is if they get to a point of NDA testing, they should, I would hope, let people know, because that will make a lot of other people feel comforted in knowing that it's kind of progressed to that point. So even if they don't get to know what it's about. But all right, we are at the end of our time. So everyone have a great week. We will be back here next Sunday. Actually, it's the start of spring break for us, so I will be off and ready to go. We'll try to find some more topics to kind of bring up while we're waiting on the next stream. So,
yeah, for sure.
Everyone have a great day.
If you folks have any topics that you want us to talk about, hit us up. You know where to find us.
Yeah, and if you're not in Discord, join us. We have been talking a lot about PAX Day and sort of that game. Super interested in the idea of no NPCs. Would love to understand a lore person's perspective there as well, even if not working on the game. But yeah, so everyone have a great rest of the day and a great week. We'll see you back here next Sunday.
Till then, have a good one, folks.